is I, Tantus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue our discussion on SHADOWRUN. We were talking about the awakened world and being magical and spells and everything of the such. We were diving into the astral plane before. Today I'm going to talk about mana barriers and adepts. Let's talk about mana barriers. Mana barriers can either be created on the physical world, they could be created in the astral world, or they could be dual nature. They're traditionally created by spells, through mana lodges, or through wards. Now, when you manifest a astral barrier on the material plane, it is invisible, and it only affects spells, manifested astral beings, or spirits that attempt to pass through it. It would effectively be a solid barrier to them. If I attempt to cast a spell through a mana barrier, then the target on the other side would get a bonus to their resistance test equal to the force of the mana barrier. It works a little different on the astral plane. In the astral plane, the mana barrier appears as this kind of opaque, kind of hazy wall that appears in front of you. It blocks astral movement, and an attempt to astrally perceive through it gets a penalty equivalent to the force of the barrier, so it makes it harder to see through the wall. Any other way that it functions exactly like it does on the physical plane. And of course, if it's dual natured, it appears on both of them at the exact same time. Now, adepts and many kind of at-will critter abilities are unaffected by mana barriers, though at the GM's discretion, there could be one that would be affected by it, depending on it, especially one that uses range. Now, the creator of a mana barrier is unaffected by it, and will know if it's ever under attack. They can register that. Now, Magical Lodge counts as being dual-natured when it comes to the mana barriers produced in it, and generally the shape of the lodge kind of tells you the shape of the astral barrier. It effectively is about in force in meters radius is the kind of area that is encompassed by this mana barrier that goes all around it. But that's the kind of general area. So it will generally be in the shape of the lodge, but will fill this certain amount of area. Now, a ward is a temporary mana barrier that can be created by someone that is awakened that has the ability to astrally perceive. It will be dual nature, just like with the lodge. When a ward is created, it covers an area equivalent to the creator's magic times 50 meters squared. More than one magician can work, or awakened creature can work together in order to create this in the same ritual. Then it would be all of their magics added together times 50 meters squared to determine the area that it's covering. Groups of magicians will often work together to do this as a kind of independent contractors or mercenaries, usually charging around 100 nuyen per ritual that is used to create it, multiplied by the number of magicians used to originally create it. Now, it takes about an hour per force of whatever the mana barrier it is to create it, and it will last a number of weeks equal to the net hits that the group got. It will be a teamwork effect, so there would be, of course, one main person, and it would be the same rules for teamwork dice checks in this case. Now, barriers created like this, they don't move. They are still in the astral plane. So that, because even being dual-natured, that means that if whatever they were originally cast on moves or for some reason changes, it does not affect where they are. Now, once it is created and the ritual is completed, everyone that was involved with creating it must take drain. The drain will be equal to the force, of course, that was used to create the mana barrier. This does mean that if someone would be more powerful involving it and the force would be higher than their magic score, they would take physical, just like with a spell, and it can be created with a force of twice the creator's magic. Now, as I said, it takes a number of hours equivalent to the force of the barrier to create in the first place, but it costs no material, so it just is a ritual that needs to be done. And it can be made permanent. If a magician would spend amount of karma equal to the force, then they can make it permanent. Otherwise, the ritual can be repeated to re-up its ability to last longer after the number of weeks that it was out has gone by, effectively to keep it going with the same ritual, same cost, except they keep the barrier going. The barrier's already there, they just can effectively refresh it. Now, barriers can be attacked in astral combat, just like they can be affected in normal combat with spells, and effectively in the physical world, astral combat can affect them. The problem with astral barriers is that you have to continually beat down them, and they are very tough, like a normal barrier would be. If they should be given a combat turn to rest, they return to full repaired status. That means they repair them back up to maximum health and get rid of all the damage if you even skip a round of attacking it. And unfortunately, this means you have to effectively chip away at it, and it takes a long time. And as I said earlier, whoever created it is going to detect that you're attacking it as soon as you do that. Now, there is another option. You could attempt to forcibly pass through the barrier. This would be an opposed Magic plus charisma test against the barrier's force rating times 2. Whoever gets the most successes, if you get more successes, if you've succeeded in the opposed test, you can just pass through it. For every net success you have, you can bring one ongoing spell, one spirit, one awakened foci, one ally with you when penetrating this. So effectively, the more successes you get, the more you can bring with you, but you need one above it in order to penetrate the barrier in the first place. So harder barriers, more forceful barriers will be much harder to penetrate even using this ability. Now, there could be times which you're being forced into an astral barrier, especially if you're in the physical world. For example, if you're in an elevator and passing in through one. Things happen when they get forced into astral barrier. You have to make the check. If you would fail the check, then certain things will happen to you or whatever is being forced through there. If you succeed, you're piercing it just fine. A spell would be disrupted if you go through there. A spell would be gone. A foci would be deactivated if it's forced through there. A spirit would be banished. And if you are an awakened creature, such as a magician being forced through there, you will be knocked out if you fail to penetrate it. Effectively, the feedback of being forced through that will knock you unconscious and fill up your stun track. Now let's talk about adepts. Adepts try to, rather than give their magical powers outwards and manipulating spells, they focus it inwards into their bodies, effectively changing them in a certain way. Adepts get a number of power points equivalent to whatever their magic score is. They can use these power points to purchase powers that are listed as adept power. They gain more power points as they gain more magic, or as they initiate, because they can initiate too, of course. Now, an adept could have a tradition if they want, but there is no in-game effect for having the tradition or being a member of the tradition. It's just an optional rule. Now, adept could also learn to astrally perceive, but they would have to purchase that power with their power point. Now, most adept powers are all about enhancing physical capabilities or possible senses, maybe even the mind, the way they one speaks, things that are reflected in the body. I could have an adept power that would make, the way my voice is sound better to normal people. I could have an adept power that makes me have an eidetic memory. Things like that. But I could also have one that increases my strength or my reflexes, my toughness of my body. Adept powers are really about physically, well, not just physically, but putting the magical powers into the core of their body that they're using. Let's talk about mystic adepts. Mystical adepts are somewhere in between a magician and an adept. They choose to split their magical score between adept powers and magical powers. Effectively, what this means is when I have my magic score as a mystical adept, I dedicate a certain portion of it to power points, which I would spend, of course, to purchase adept powers. The other portion of my magic score I would dedicate to magic. What I would do is I would dedicate it to spells, summoning spirits, banishing, all those kind of things. And that amount of my score might be used with when I'm using any kind of skill check related to casting a spell or banishing or summoning a spirit or anything like that. Then that is the portion of my magic I would be using for those dice rolls. I would effectively split it between some that's dedicated to my adept powers and some that is dedicated to my spells. Of course, now if there's any numerical kind of values that deal with it, then you're going to use your full magic score for this. It's just that when I'm coming down to the dice rolls, it matters that my magic score would be, let's say, 2 for this, and I would have spent 3 to my power points. As a mystic adept, I would not have as many spells or as many adept powers, but the fact is I would have a better variety of things. I'm choosing to sort of split my focus a little bit, but to have more options available to me because of it, rather than to be sort of shoehorned into one group or the other. Now, adept powers, as I said, are arranged alphabetically, and they effectively give you the PowerPoint cost of each of them. Many of a PowerPoint cost that could be something like 1 or 2, but there are ones that are fractions, that could be, say, like 0.25 or 0.5. There's also ones that say you could take multiple ranks in it. The maximum number of ranks you can take is equivalent to what your magic score that you dedicated to being an adept would be. So if my magic would be 4 as an adept, I could take 4 ranks in a power at maximum. Now, because PowerPoints can be sort of broken down in fractions, you are actually able to save fractions. You do not have to spend all your PowerPoints when you're purchasing. You could learn new abilities later on. So that's it for today. I went over mana barriers. I talked about them being both in the astral and the physical plane. I talked about creating them and overcoming them. Then I talked about adepts and mystical adepts, that they are ones that focus their magic into their bodies and affect them in a variety of manners, whether it's physically affecting them, affecting their senses, or affecting something in their mind, or the way that they may reflect themselves to the world by affecting them in their own bodies in a way. I'm going to move into talking about initiation, which I've briefly mentioned, foci, again I briefly mentioned, and then go into mentor spirits. So any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel, the empire, and the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you can check out my Patreon, link in the description below. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.